Good afternoon and welcome again to Government in Transition, a program brought to you by the People's Progressive Party Civic. I'm Michael Gordon. I'm joined this afternoon by two distinguished guests. First, our Prime Minister-elect, Brigadier retired Mark Phillips, and Attorney at Law Marcia Nadir Sharma. Colleagues, I welcome you both to this program.
Good afternoon, Michael, PM-elect.
Hello, Marcia.
Viewers.
And hello to our viewers.
I'd like to also welcome our viewers and listeners across Guyana in the diaspora, especially those listening to and viewing this program on Freedom Radio 91.1 FM. If I may get straight into the issue, and one of the topical issues at hand is the recently held meeting of the Permanent Council of the Organization of American States, where the supposed Attorney General and Minister of Foreign Affairs both pleaded all innocence to the Permanent Council of the OAS and expressed a repeated line, which is an inaccurate line by the APNU-FC of that party's, the coalition's innocence in the delay of the declaration of results. PM, I'm going to bring you in first as it relates to the doublespeak of the coalition from the perspective of doing one thing and professing innocence to the world by stating that they have not been doing this, they have not been doing that. We've seen three separate individuals, supposedly private citizens, all connected to, linked with, and perhaps even candidates. Not perhaps, a former candidate of the coalition moved to the court to delay the declaration of the results. How do you reflect on this level of hypocrisy by the APNU-FCP?
Well, thank you, Michael. And again, thank you for our viewers for an opportunity to speak on the political issue in Guyana. You know, let me start by saying it's embarrassing for me to attend my first OAS meeting and to listen to two Guyanese who continue to hold on to their ministerial posts from the last government and should be speaking for the state of Guyana, the government of Guyana. And what they did, they took a party position, the APNU-AFC position, and lied. But luckily, the OAS Permanent Council allowed us, myself and Council Anil Nandalal, to speak at that forum. And I think that in addition to the fact that the CCJ ruling and all the different rulings are public knowledge, the results of the recount is public knowledge. And I must say, notwithstanding the attempts to misrepresent the issues by Mrs. Karen Cummins and Mr. Basil Williams, when you listen to the presentations by the representatives, the ambassadors, and the Secretary General of the OAS, those diplomats are well informed as to the situation in Guyana. And that is what saved the day. They were unable, with their lies and misrepresentation, to budge the opinion formed by those diplomats, the informed opinion formed by those diplomats. And if you would have listened to the entire program and listened to the speeches, you realize that what Mr. Williams and Mrs. Cummins did there yesterday, they wasted their time and they made Guyana look bad. This is a government that prides itself with, you know, improving the image of Guyana on the regional and international scene. And in one fell swoop, an election that they lost and they continue to cling to power, they have brought Guyana into disrepute on the international scene. So what they claim that they constructed and built for Guyana, they've destroyed. by just trying to cling to power. And you know what? All the speeches yesterday, everybody at some stage send the message loud and clear. Utilize the results of the recount and declare as early as possible the winners of the election in Guyana. And you know what? In saying that, they're also saying to the APNU AFC, step aside and let democracy prevail in Guyana. And that is what the APNU AFC appears not to be prepared to do. They do not want to demit office. Something about this office, holding on to power in Guyana after losing an election. They just keep clinging to power. This is no longer the 1960s, the 1970s, and the 1980s. This is the 21st century. Democracy must prevail. And they must know that. And you know, in order for the PNC or the APNU to survive as a coalition, and likewise the AFC, in addition to stepping aside from government, perhaps they should look at themselves, and the older guys should step aside and let the younger generation come up and assume positions of leadership in those parties. Because I want to believe that many of the younger generations, the young professionals in those parties, are more in tune with the 21st century values, which include democracy.
PM, I know you've referenced those parties, but when I look from my mind, when I look at the APNU AFC, especially their posture in recent times, I see nothing else but PNC. But Marcia, I want to bring you in on this same issue. However, from the perspective that what took place yesterday, and it must be underscored, that what took place yesterday could be considered not necessarily unprecedented, but significantly so, a rarity, where the permanent council of a large grouping unanimously supported one position. Normally, what you find here or there is that a different member may have a dissenting view on a particular issue. But you really don't find, rarely, perhaps you could count it on one hand, the permanent council of an important and a significant grouping unanimously supported a position, including Venezuela, and which is embarrassing, as the PM says, hold a unanimous position on a particular issue, and it relates to the undemocratic posture of the APNU AFC.
So what you had displayed on an international level was an uncouth and disgraceful representation of what has been the APNU's wolf disguised in sheep's clothing narrative. Because you saw not only did the former Attorney General on an international stage lie to the Permanent Council by saying the Caribbean Court of Justice ruled that Order 60 was invalid, and thereby lending credence and credibility to their proposition that the March 13th declarations were still valid. You had a position that was superseded in time, being the Chief Justice's decision, and he still stood there in, again, I will say, wolf disguised in sheep clothing, because it's not hate, it's important that we remember, and some of the facts that we have to keep repeating over and over so that we do not forget the realities of the 2020 election. And what are those realities? President Granger said in the no confidence motion he will hold election on the advice of GCOM. GCOM said, they need 3 months. That 3 months lent itself to a longer period, culminating ultimately in the March deadline. He said, okay, the elections were free and fair, and we will stand by the decision of GCOM. Then you had the Mingo fiasco. Then he came out and said, no, 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 no. We're very law abiding, and we want to adhere and comply. But you know what? A private citizen has gone to court, so we have to wait. Then he said, "Oh, I'm going to abide by the ruling of the court." Court said, "Okay, you have to have the recount." All right, let me give a credit, a little feather to the cap. The recount happened. During the course of the recount, what did the president say? He got up and said, "I will abide by the results of the recount." Said that in his first public appearance throughout the entire recount process. When the recount process was done and it showed that the PPC had garnered its 233,336 votes overall, he turned around and said, "Well, hold on, step up. I have to comply with what GCOM says." And then you had everything else. Then you had several other cases, and I re-emphasize this wolf in sheep's clothing, because we cannot forget the incestuous relationship that exists between all three of these applicants to the APNUAFC, which has been confirmed by Mr. Harmon's public posture that we are going to appeal. And here you had Basil Williams and Dr. Cummins going on international stage to embarrass not only themselves, but the people of Guyana at that level and at that meeting. And I said it before and I'll say it again, it was very uncouth, very disgraceful, and extremely embarrassing. And if anybody internationally is listening to this program, we are not like that. Guyanese people are not like that. That what you saw demonstrated and portrayed yesterday is not a reflection of the character of Guyanese. And it's important that everybody knows that.
Two words you use, they stand out: uncouth and disgraceful. I'm referring to the utterances by the supposed Attorney General, who said the CCJ ruled, and the Chief Justice also supported the ruling of the higher court, the Caribbean Court of Justice, that Order 60 stands, the subsidiary law which provided for the recount. However, the Attorney General said to the Permanent Council of the OAS that the CCJ nullified the recount. Do you see this as an affront? And I've been asking lawyers all over the place, left, right, and center. Do you see this as an affront, Marcia, to this noble profession to which you belong?
Absolutely. I have said this point repeatedly, and it doesn't apply only to Mr. Williams. It applies really and truly to the entire battery of APNUAFC affiliated lawyers, because that to take such stellar judgments from CCJ and the Court of Appeal and now the Chief Justice and twist it and massage it so that it fits a political narrative does not define what our ethical and professional responsibilities are in the legal profession. At some point in time, we as lawyers have to say to our clients, enough is enough. You have a right to litigate, yes, but you also have a responsibility not to waste the court's time, not to abuse the resources of the judicial system, which has been happening relentlessly for the last couple of months in relation to these elections. And that moral code, that ethical code of saying to your client, listen, we have done all that we can do. It is now time for you to accept the results of the court or the judgment of the court, and accept the results is the last shred of hope I can have as an attorney to my fellow colleagues, that they will exercise same. But to continue and to persist on this narrative, even though you have been ruled against so many times by courts of competent jurisdiction, is more than an affront. It's disgraceful. There is no other word to describe this relentless behavior. And it's relentless. And there's no explanation other than wanting to hold on to power. Because if you were seeing anything substantive coming out of the caretaker government between March and now, look in relation to COVID itself, you can appreciate, okay, there might, maybe we might be harsh, but we're not being harsh. You single sourcing the building of a facility which is supposed to deal with a current pandemic. We have no idea when it's going to be ready, if it's ready. You have no true communication of what is the true state of COVID, except, oh, we had a few less than 100 tested cases. And you have to beg and pull information out as it relates to the active cases or non-active cases in the entire, by region, breakdown by region, or even by demographics, or even by age groups. You don't know. So if they were doing something constructive, you can understand, okay, maybe there was something, and COVID is just one example, but you can understand and say, well, maybe there's some genuine merit, because there are tangibles and measurables that we can look at, but we don't have that. And the people at March 2nd said, but you have not delivered, so we're voting you out. And that is what happened.
PM-elect, I want to refer to what we have been discussing prior to this program. And that would be the most recent press statement from the APNO FC. Two things stand out to me in that press release. And one is that, okay, we're ready to negotiate. Let's have a conversation. I know there's a familiar phrase used by the Americans, for example. We don't negotiate with terrorists. The second one is that whilst asking for discussions and talks to be held in the interest of peace, the APNO FC continues to insist, notwithstanding rulings from the Apex Court of Guyana, augmented and endorsed by the Chief Justice earlier this week, that the numbers for the recount must be used as the basis for a declaration. The APNO AFC in this recent release continues to insist and to hold on to this alien notion of valid and validity of votes. PM, how do you respond to this, whilst at the same time arguing that we will respect the declaration of GCOM, we will respect the rule of law? No, you're saying we'll respect GCOM's declaration, but GCOM must and GCOM must not.
Well, this is the arrogance of the coalition. You know, this elitist group, this arrogant group. Some people refer to them as the cabal, you know, the inner circle, the people around my goodly Brigadier Granger, you know, who is the architect of everything that is happening right now. While he continues to hide behind the scenes, you can see his hands in all the actions of his minions, you know, his lieutenants, if you don't want to call them minions, because, you know, they may not like the word minions. But the reality is that he's the architect, and they keep changing the narrative, you know, believing that in the changing of the narrative, they remain in an advantageous position every step of the game. But we won in elections. We don't have to change any narrative. We have to stand firm knowing that we are on the right side of the law. Here is a set of people who telling you now, but what? Credible votes and valid votes, right? The recount, credible votes and valid votes they'll stand by. They're trying to change the narrative and they're confusing themselves. The recount process ended with a set of valid votes. And the valid votes, you know, I don't want to repeat ad nauseum, you know, everybody knows by now the valid votes show that the PPPC won the elections by 15,416 of those valid votes. So to come and tell us now about standing by the recount, but the votes must be valid, it's a non-issue. You already dealt with that, and we know the PPP won the elections, right? If you look at the results of the valid votes or the results of the recount, right? As I said before, and I said yesterday, declaration is just a formality. The whole world knows that the PPP won these elections. You know, so they're just trying to more or less mobilize their supporters by every other day coming with a spin and releasing it for the consumption of their supporters. But I rather believe that more and more, every day whenever they spin the message, more and more they have confused supporters and less supporters, because the time has come. If you interact with people who are AP and UFC supporters, they're telling you now, they're now telling you that, look, they never despacalize, right? It's obvious that the PPPC won these elections. Let her wrap up this thing so life could go back as per normal in Guyana. People want to get back into their business activity. People want to get to work, you know? People want to earn money, you know, to feed their family, you know, to pay their utility bills, to invest in business. They want to see Guyana grow, you know? And the business people, they're the ones who will tell you there are a lot of business interests lined up for Guyana, but people are saying, hey, we want to wait until the situation, the political situation, clear up in Guyana. So what the APNU AFC is doing is no good for us, the people of Guyana, is no good for themselves, right? They continue to remain in power to do what? To continue to harm the people, to continue to starve the people, to continue to be ineffective in dealing with COVID-19 pandemic, to prevent investments from coming to Guyana. They need to step aside. We don't want to negotiate. That's the first question. I dealt with your second question first, the one with the numbers, right? We won, so everything is valid there. The next one, I don't want to call them terrorists. You don't negotiate with terrorists. That's my part of my training in the military. You do not negotiate with a terrorist. But these people, while I don't want to call them terrorists, I'll call them another bad name. They're political bullies, and we will not negotiate with political bullies. If we are on the right side of the law, there's no need for us to negotiate. It's for us to stand firm and allow GCOM to make the final declaration. What Mr. Granger called it, stage 4. What they need to do is to stop wasting the people of Guyana time by having a series of applications and litigations in the court, obstructing the progress towards stage 4. They need to get off the neck of GCOM. That's what they need to do. And allow GCOM to do their work and make the declaration in keeping with the recount results. And once they get out of the court system and allow GCOM to breathe, GCOM will make that declaration. And GCOM will prevail in Guyana.
I want to bring you in on the same issue, Marcia, especially from the perspective of even a tweet by the Secretary General of the Organization of American States speaks to the abuse of the court system by APNU-FC, who, by the way, 2 weeks ago or less, has been what they are now referring to as invalid vote. 2 weeks ago or less, they were prepared to claim victory with the inclusion of what they're now calling valid votes and 15,000 more. What really? I'm going to use the clearly, was really a story. You're telling me 5, 6, 7 different stories. Let's be consistent, at least be consistent about the lie.
Yeah, I've been confusing you too?
Well, all we can describe, all the best way to describe the four or five different versions of the same facts is really a compilation of a fairy tales novel. It may be a Mr. Pink Whistle in its very best narration and in the simplest form that we can put and celebrate Edith Blyton and say, it's just five different ways you can take one set of true facts and manipulate it for your own benefit. It might not be the lesson we want to teach our children, but it is a reality of what you see happening here, right? And to come and it's a slight repeat of what PM is saying, but to come and say, I am prepared to wait on the declaration and let GCOM finish its work, but at the same time, we are appealing the decision of the Chief Justice merely confirms again that they are doing everything within their power, including abusing the court system, to stymie and stifle and prevent GCOM from completing what is clearly stated in Article 1772B, that the party with the most votes, or the head of the list, or the presidential candidate of that list, is deemed the president. Okay? And people need to understand, our public need to understand, to have your democracy discussed at a forum like the Permanent Council of the Organization of American States, which is, in my mind, second to the United Nations, speaks volumes about the image and character of your country. And Mr. Golden said it summarized it very nicely, but at the same time sad, when he said that it will take an entire generation to fix the damage caused to Guyana's credibility and its image. And that needs to sink in to our viewers and to the people of Guyana, including the APNU AFC supporters, because if the OAS and our international partners were to exercise sanction power on the economic standing of Guyana, there is no other way in its simplest form to explain the impact than to use, for example, milk formula. And I used this example yesterday, and I'll use it again today. With all the advances in the world, medical and otherwise, technological resources, human resource development, our children are born with peculiar allergies. And Guyana does not manufacture a wide cross section of, for example, baby formula, soy, cow base, or otherwise. Now you have a baby in Guyana in a sanction-ridden and hit country, and you are looking for a basic commodity like soy base formula for your child who has an allergy for cow-based formula. You will not get it. And you will not get it because we would not have had the capacity to import it. We do not have the capacity to make it, manufacture it, and we will not have the capacity to import it. So who punishes? Not the illegal and unlawful APNU AFC ministers who will be receiving their salaries from the taxpayers' money, who will be still enjoying the state paying for their benefits. It is your child who will punish. And that is the long-term consequences of OAS or any other major international organization and country taking sanctions against us as a country. Now, yes, we've argued and we've tried to make our public aware that when the sanctions hit, it will hit, yes, primarily those persons, as Secretary of State Mike Pompeo has said, it will hit those persons who are seeking to undermine democracy and the will of the people in Guyana. But if that relentless stubbornness and need to hold on to power over the welfare of our people subsists after the court makes another decision and GCOM makes a declaration, it is all of us who will feel the consequences of sanction.
I want to raise a layman's issue, and I just received a message on WhatsApp from a very vocal supporter of APNO AFC. And she asked a question, and Marcy, perhaps I'm going to ask you to lead on this. Why y'all want the CEO to listen to the chairman and not the other way around? Respond to this, Marcy, because it seems as though there is a particular group of people who continue to listen to the filth spewed by the PR machinery of APNO AFC, and it continues unabated daily and unchecked.
There are two explanations. There is a legalistic explanation, which is essentially a position that we have been consistently saying since
and a common sense explanation.
Well, and the common sense everyday explanation. The legal explanation, PPC has been saying it and the court affirmed it. Mr. Lowenfield, sorry, let's not personalize it then. The CEO of the commission is a functionary of the commission. The person who has the power and the authority to make decisions are the chairwoman and her commissioners. And in a commonsensical position, if you have, let's break it down into, you're redesigning a house and you go to your contractor and say, what do you think? Give me advice on whether I should paint my house blue or red. And the contractor said, Madam, I think, my advice is that you paint it white, because blue and red, one, I don't like it. It doesn't suit me. It doesn't play into my hand. Blue or white will not guarantee me a pardon if I do anything illegal or unlawful. Okay? And if I paint it white, there's less time I got to do. So, and then me, the errant homeowner who doing the renovations will say, me really care. All right, I can throw away all my own preferences, all my own reasoning, all the facts. Blue might reflect light or whatever the case may be, and take your advice alone. It's who living in the house? The contractor or me? I have to live in the house. And that is what the people of Guyana are saying. We live in Guyana. That is why we get to choose every 5 years who will be in this house and who will manage and pay the bills of this house. It's not a contractor. And that is, as it's in its simplest, I think I hope I'm communicating it accurately by using the metaphors that I've done, but ultimately it is the people of this country who exercise the right and the decision-making power. And what we do is constitutionally, we said, Madam Chair or GCOM, when we finish voting, we are empowering you to make sure that what we selected and what we chose is acted upon. And that's all you have here.
PM-elect, you want to jump in on this point, because there seems to be a slavish reliance on any and everything said by the PR machinery of APNO AFC.
Well, as Marcia said, let us go to the laws of Guyana. And the laws will explain everything clearly, even for the supporters of the AP and UFC. They depend on the leadership, and the leadership of the AP and UFC is misguiding them. Here is a leadership, and I want to identify two of the leaders, Mr. Basil Williams and one Mr. Raphael Trotman, two attorneys at law, who loud and clear told their leaders, told the entire Guyana, that whatever Mr. Lowenfield put before the commissioners and the chairperson of GCOM, they must accept it. That's basically what they're saying. Mr. Lowenfield has all the rights. He has all the authority. He's a law unto himself. So then Mr. Lowenfield is the sole arbiter, the only person who decides who must win the election, not the people who voted, Mr. Lowenfield. So the people voted, but Mr. Lowenfield could come and do his own addition and subtraction and put it before the chairman, the chairperson, and the commissioners, and they, like a set of rubber stamp, will put their seal of approval and declare. But the law does not say so. The law is very clear. Mr. Lowenfield is a statutory officer. He's appointed by the constitutional body known as GCOM. And he is managed, he supervised, his instructions as to, you know, the whole affairs of GCOM must flow from that constitutional body. And that constitutional body has the authority to direct him. That is clear. The letters written by the chair to him were directives. Utilize the recount results, right? To prepare your report for this board. And that's very clear. He cannot deviate from that. What he did, he went and get a fraudulent results of Mr. Mingo, right? A result that was placed in abeyance, which the same GCOM later dismissed, set aside. And notwithstanding the decision of GCOM to set aside Mr. Ringo results, Mr. Lowenfield went and take the same results and submitted them. I mean, that's insubordination. He should be fired for that. He should be fired for that. In any organization, a behavior like that will result in you being dismissed, separated from the organization. So Mr. Lowenfield is not a law unto himself. GCOM is the constitutional body, and even Mr. Alexander, who's a commissioner of GCOM, is on record of giving us an example in the past, a precedent where GCOM corrected a former CEO. When he presented his results, GCOM looked at it and said, this is not in keeping with the law, and they sent him back. And he had to go and correct it and resubmit it. And when
they're very proud of that, you know.
Huh?
And they're very proud that they did that because they reminded us they did that.
No,
exactly.
but in my view, I think the clearest of example was one described by none other than one Pete Lowenfield in relation to the relationship between the secretariat headed by the CEO. So specifically the relationship between the CEO and the commission. That was explained at length by Mr. Keith Lowenfield.
Oh, when he did the video with Mr. Suraj.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's another example. So why are these guys 5 years after going back on what they took pains to explain to the people 5 years before? It's because this time the APNU have lost the elections. Maybe if the APNU has won the elections, those explanations would have been repeated.
They might have been put in abeyance.
If I may return this discussion.
Again, the change in narrative, and GCOM now is part of the change in GCOM Secretariat, elements in GCOM Secretariat. You know, like Mr. Lowenfield and Mr. Mingo, you know, they're part of this whole trying to change things now to confuse the people. But I hope your caller is now clear on the matter that Mr. Lowenfield is a statutory officer and he takes orders from the constitutional body chaired by Madam Justice Pladet Singh.
If I may return us to the meeting of the Permanent Council of the Organization of American States, which took place just about 24 hours ago. There is an indication that the level of the type of language, PM, and you had the fortune of participating in that meeting. You will learn, along with the learned attorney Hanul Nandlal. I get the distinct impression that fancy diplomatic language is fast, as it relates to the Guyana elections saga, is fast becoming a thing of the past. And the words and warnings of the international community are now becoming sterner more harsh, and more direct. Your views on some of the utterances, and perhaps if you could reflect on one or two of the comments made by some of the countries yesterday.
Well, you know, Michael, you're right, because sometime in the past, I visited the OAS and I listened to a meeting when I was in Washington. And, you know, the diplomatic speak itself could have you boring. And then you have to listen at the end for what exactly the person is saying, you know, a lot of flowery speeches and so.
Sometimes you have to decipher what was said.
Exactly, but yesterday it was clear. I don't know if there was a pre-meeting of the representatives, but I can tell you it was quite clear yesterday. The simplest of language, even a child could have understood what those diplomats were saying yesterday. And you know, they did it in the shortest possible time. So it's obvious that it was a deliberate effort not to have too many flowery diplomatic language, but to hit the points, you know? And the main points is very clear. Utilize the results of the recount. Have a declaration in the shortest possible time. You know, very clear. And the Secretary General, Mr. Almagro, in his tweet, you know, he went on further to mention about his concern about, you know, this whole matter before the judiciary that is slowing up the whole process towards a declaration, you know, and all the countries were clear, you know, and, you know, not only talking about using the results of the recount and the declaration in the shortest possible time, but what was impressive is how informed the diplomats were about the situation in Guyana. And I think every Guyanese should have put aside what their supporters are telling them about Mr. Golden and perhaps go and listen to Mr. Golden's presentation. Listen to Mr. Golden's presentation. He expressed a lot of concern for Guyana, present situation and the future of Guyana. We should listen to all of us should listen to Mr. Golden's presentation. And nothing that he said can be refuted. He stated the facts in the lead up to elections, the election day, the most peaceful day in Guyana, orderly voting, and everything that transpired afterwards until now.
Marcia, I want you to reflect on the two extremes, and I know even you personally are capable of those two extremes of the diplomatic language and the harsh speak. But is it an ominous sign of what is to come, and the general feeling within the Americas grouping?
It is ominous in the sense that the clear and plain spoken positions articulated by the diplomats of the OAS yesterday suggest that the time for diplomacy and niceties are essentially at the end of its tether and at the end of the rope. And ominous because if the AP and UAFC does not concede or act responsibly or in the best interest of the people of this country and abide by not only the ruling of the court, but more importantly, by the will of the people, we have a very clear understanding that the international community is prepared to stand with the people of Guyana to ensure that the democracy in Guyana is sustained and essentially not torn to shreds. I still remain hopeful, though, that we will not need to come to that position because, again, a beautiful opportunity is being presented to the APNU to honor its word and be bounded by its word and to have some shred of use of whatever strings of integrity it has or strands of integrity it has left to to do what it says it will do, which is to abide by the decisions of the court and abide by the decision of GCOM, and to stop trying to manipulate and influence the outcome of the elections through its rogue affiliates within the Elections Commission. But I wouldn't want our viewing public to worry at this point, or to add to their daily stress by the heavy nature of, again, an international organization as big as the OAS sitting and discussing Guyana's democracy. But just have it at the back of your head as a lingering thought that at the end of the day, if you have access to your leaders of the AP and UAFC, and you have the ability to say, Mr. Granger or my party, why don't we stop this? This is an opportunity for you to exercise that power over and that influence you have over your party.
Of course, this has to be coupled with the highly anticipated special meeting of the CARICOM heads of government, who within 24 hours, sometime tomorrow, will be meeting specifically on the Guyana issue. Guyana, as said by the learned Priya Manichan earlier, Guyana is not an item on the agenda of these meetings. Guyana is the agenda of these meetings. And it has to be one, especially from a patriotic perspective, one has to be, and I'm going to ask you, point this question to you, Brigadier. One has to be a bit despondent as Guyanese in the face of these reputable groupings, having to call special meetings to discuss the wrongs that have been happening in our beloved Guyana. This more so from the perspective, as a patriot. So we are anticipating the meeting of the CARICOM heads of government tomorrow, just about 48 hours after meeting of the OAS Permanent Council. I'm not attempting to put you in the mind of a David Granger, but as a former Army general, Mr. Granger himself so being, and as a patriot, how does one feel for country and countrymen when your country is not, I don't want to use the term being dragged through the mud, but being looked at in such a negative light? Brigadier?
Well, look, to simply place it, you could feel shame, you could feel bad, but there is good in everything. There's a lesson for all of us in what Guyana is going through now. And what we need to do is to learn the lesson and to commit ourselves to not having a repeat of what is happening now in Guyana. We have, as a people, we have to commit ourselves that democracy, as we move on, democracy must remain unshakable in Guyana. We need to strengthen the institutions, right? That in turn will strengthen our democracy in Guyana. What we have seen is a weak, a fragile democracy that was further tampered with by a government that was elected by the same democratic process, just for their narrow, the narrow objectives of remaining in power. This is a government who talks about a decade of development, and it's interesting. They're talking about a decade of development at a time when their popularity was waning, and then eventually they lost the elections. They want to continue to hold on to this decade for development and to remain in power as an undemocratic dictatorial government. This is nonsense. You can still be in the opposition and be a vibrant opposition and work with the elected government and pursue the objectives linked to this decade of development for Guyana. You don't have to be in power, and trying to remain in power and remain a part of all these international organizations makes no sense, because Guyana thrives on developmental aid and assistance from all the international organizations that we are part of. CARICOM has a Caribbean Development Bank. The OAS, they have the Inter-American Development Bank. The European Union, they have the Eurobank. The Commonwealth may not have a bank, but they can mobilize finances for developmental assistance in member countries. And if we do not have our house in order, we will not continue to benefit from the development assistance from those organizations that we pride ourselves of being a member of. So this government must look at things from all angles, and they must now commit themselves to democracy by just stepping aside and allow the elected government to assume governance of Guyana. And they should be trying to become a vibrant opposition. So we must not be despondent with what is happening now. We must see some good that will come out of this, in the sense that we must commit ourselves as we move forward, that this must not happen again in Guyana. The next transition of government sometime in the future, whenever they could rebuild themselves and be a formidable force to win an election.
And regain credibility.
Huh?
And regain credibility.
And regain credibility. It will take some time. But any future transition of government must not be so painful to the people of Guyana.
You made a very important point in relation to the international financial institutions. There is also the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank.
Exactly.
And we all know who are the power brokers and the movers and shakers within those institutions, many of whom you have taken an affront. So, Marcia, I'm going to, looking ahead, I referenced the CARICOM meeting tomorrow, and also the anticipated appeal in the Masinga Jones case. I'm going to ask you briefly to comment on both of those before we wrap this program up.
Well, in relation to the Court of Appeal, as you know, we would have had a case management conference today at 3 o'clock, where the court basically established a particular set of timelines for us to submit, for the parties to all make their necessary submissions to the court. Those submissions to be completed and exchanged and completed all essentially on or before Friday evening, and with a hearing being set for Saturday at 10 a.m. And the court has indicated that it is prepared to sit all day on Saturday to hear the case to its completion. At the end of the case on Saturday, the court will indicate to us when we can anticipate and expect a judgment. With the speed and the haste with which, and the urgency, I should say, that the court has addressed this appeal, considering that it was only filed yesterday, having come out of a decision on Monday, is obviously, it gives confidence that we as a nation can expect that the Court of Appeal appreciates and understands the importance and the urgency of completing this case in a timely manner, so that, of course, GCOM can complete the process. Having said that, we also must be aware that should any of the parties not agree with whatever the decision of the Court of Appeal will be, then the next step could very well be an appeal to the CCJ. So from that perspective, there is a bit more time for patience. We will be calling for patience, of course. From a CARICOM perspective, I think we can expect a similar tone and a similar conversation and discussion as that that we saw yesterday, the OAS. And again, it's not something to necessarily be proud of, that organizations such as the OAS and CARICOM have to stop dealing with more urgent matters of the day that are relevant to a global environment that is stricken by disease and illness. And of course, a downward turn in economics on the whole. Guyana and its inability to complete an election that is 4 months plus running is not something to be proud of, and not something to be proud of, really. I want to also say, and I want to thank our supporters and generally all, even if you didn't support us, for having patience. The BAPC has maintained its position and its fight for democracy, and I can assure you we have the stamina to continue the fight. But what we would obviously be appealing for is for you, our public, to exercise the stamina in patience with us as we go through the steps. There's no shortcut. There's no jumping a step. We have legitimately and lawfully won these elections in March, and we will lawfully and legitimately exercise the transition of power. There are lots of calls for demanding that the chair must act and demanding that GCOM must act, but they too are parties before the courts, and they too are subject to the rulings of the court and the etiquette and the protocol associated with being a party before the court. So for everyone involved in the matter, I would be appealing for more patience and confidence in our ability to sustain this fight.
Brigadier, your closing comments are in essence an appeal to the Guyanese public in the context of their frustrations and being weary of the ongoing court battle after battle. I am even beginning to hear judgment that gives me some impression of weariness at the level of the judiciary, of the continued litigation of the same matter. Your closing comments, PM.
Well, while we have concerns about the continued litigations, the Guyanese people, they're on show, and the world is talking that our people are well behaved, they're calm, and like everybody else, they're awaiting the peaceful transition to the new government. The whole world is commending the people of Guyana, and I wish to add my voice again and commend our people and ask that we continue to be calm. We have court this weekend, we have a ruling next week, and we, as Marcia mentioned, we're likely to have the CCJ engaged again. So as I told the viewership in Trinidad this morning, we have another, like 2 weeks or 3 weeks of court, but the inevitable will happen. The transition from the APNU, AFC to the PPPC government. That transition has started already, right? And it will happen sooner than later. So let us all continue to be firm in our belief and be calm as we await the transition.
Prime Minister-elect.
The rule of law to take its course. The rule of law must take its course.
Absolutely. Prime Minister-elect, Brigadier retired Mark Phillips, Attorney at Law Marcia Nadir Sharma. I thank you both colleagues for being a part of this program.
Thank you, Michael. Good
Thank
evening.
you, Michael. Thank you, Marcy.
Thanks, PM.
Yours.
This has been Government in Transition. I am Michael Gordon. Thank you for watching and listening. Goodbye.